Bunker for sale. It was a cold morning in New York City. People were shuffling along the sidewalks, most of them in long, thick, fur-lined, gray, black, or brown overcoats. They looked more like a flea circus, from my vantage point. I was drinking hot chocolate in my warm, air-conditioned, high-rise, glass window-lined corner office, looking down on this mass of human movement, when my desk phone rang and snapped me out of my vertical stare. It was the chairman, Mr. Grosser. He had called a meeting of the board members and requested my presentation in half an hour. Fortunately, I was ready, apart from a few files that I asked the secretary to source from the archives, which he made sure were delivered promptly. It was always intimidating standing before the board of directors. Something I could never shake, but I thought I was onto something big this time. Despite the black suit and blue tie, I was basically a researcher for a global salvage company. My job at Bonafide International was to find misplaced or lost artifacts or transcripts or pretty much anything of potential value. I would present my findings to the board regularly, who would then decide how to recover the items and claim salvage rights, then auction off the articles or develop the intellectual property. It was a broad and complex task because one day you might locate a relic and the next a computer application that hadn't quite reached its full potential. I opened my files on the polished teak conference table and presented my latest research. An Austrian physicist who had been taken by the SS during the war to work on a nuclear project had written a book not long before he disappeared. A small granite gravestone I located in a German cemetery for missing people simply read, Harold Blomqvist, born 1881, was all I could find of him. There was a grumble amongst the members and Mr. Grosso asked if I could elaborate at all on my findings. I told him that the book, which I had acquired with company funds from a relatively unknown auction house, seemed to have codes built into the text. One reference I had decoded, thanks to the help of a business acquaintance, turned out to be the exact GPS coordinates of the apartment he lived in before he was listed as missing. The murmur sounded a little more positive now. I was asked what I needed to further my research and was granted an all-expense-paid trip to Austria plus a research assistant and permission to take my code-breaking acquaintance with me, after a background security check of course. I knew my so-called research assistant would be a company plant to make sure I didn't run off with anything valuable, but I also knew it was company policy which was legally sewn up. Plus I didn't mind so much when, that afternoon, a lovely young lady in a short red dress and long dark hair entered my office to introduce herself. Her name was Lucy Calienti and she said she was ready to depart at a moment's notice. My company had booked 3 tickets on a flight the following afternoon. I briefed her on our task. Her qualifications were in crime journalism, which told me she was well suited to this kind of investigation. After she left the room, my numbers man Robert Parker returned my call and said he had put his life on hold to come on the trip. He asked if he could have the book today so he could do some research in the 24 hours or so before the flight. I agreed and within half an hour we were having coffee together at a diner across the street. He was awestruck with the book. I had only given him a copy of the one page to break the GPS code, but now he had the whole lot. He looked like a kid in a candy store. I loved his enthusiasm. I'm sure he had some sort of syndrome which always made for interesting times when hanging out with him. He had a brilliant mind but lacked social confidence, which he more than made up for with a good sense of humor. For some reason this shyness made him a hit with the ladies, something I couldn't fully understand, but perhaps I was just jealous. I left work early that afternoon to pack and try to get a good night's sleep prior to the flight. I left my cat Paws with Margaret next door, who was always happy to have her. She was called Paws because whenever she was frightened she would freeze on the spot like you pause a film on TV. I read through everything regarding Harold, including the copy of his original book. There was a note in there from a company source saying the gardens were overgrown and the apartment did not appear to have been lived in for some time. I guess if your apartment block does not have a gardener, the advantage to living on the ground floor is being able to have a nice garden. The disadvantage of living any higher than that was to look down on an unkempt yard. I went to bed wondering what we might find there. The 3 of us met at the office with our luggage, which we loaded into the company limousine for the trip to the airport. Apart from the crowd crowds and the half-hour delay, it was an uneventful departure. We had 3 seats together, in business class, and once we took off, Rob brought out the book and Lucy her laptop. She jumped in before Rob and said that while doing some research on the internet regarding the ownership of the property, she found it was for sale by auction by a relatively unknown real estate agency who were just waiting for some more interest before they will put it on the market. I called Grocer immediately, but he was unavailable, so I left a message with his secretary to generate some phony interest in the Vienna property. Now it was Rob's turn. He was itching to tell me about his preliminary understanding of the codes used. From what he could work out, somewhere underground was a bunker containing valuables, and most of the codes were coordinates which mapped out a path to find it. It looked like we would have to do everything we could to secure that apartment at auction. We touched down in Vienna late at night and took a taxi to the Sacher Hotel. At check-in, I booked a table for 3 in the hotel restaurant and told the others to sleep in, to overcome the jet lag, and then meet for lunch. It was a beautiful old hotel. My company spent no expense on travel and accommodation. They could afford to, though, being the second biggest salvage company in the world, and if Grocer had anything to do with it, soon to be the biggest, because he enjoyed swallowing up similar companies. I was asleep as soon as my head hit the pillow, and woke mid-morning. I showered, shaved, and made my way down to meet the others. I was a little early, so I read the local paper as best I could. My German was a little rusty. With the team all together, I was happy to find they had both continued with their research, and I started to consider recommending them for a bonus. Lucy had lined up a bona fide international, endorsed real estate agent to act on our behalf and bid on the property. While she was doing that, Rob told me Dr. Blomqvist was also a lecturer at the University of Vienna. Apparently he had a number of papers published and stored there. It might be a lead worth following up while we waited for word of an auction. We hired a car and drove first to the property itself. It was run down and overgrown with some thorny vine which seemed to have been commanded to protect the apartment from intruders. The property was on the corner of Wolfischgasse and Akademiestrasse. It had high black, iron Centurion spear fencing, atop a low red brick wall. The building was made of the same red brick. There appeared to be a large shallow pool or fountain, long since dried up. There wasn't much more to see, so we were about to depart, when an old lady came out of the upstairs apartment and asked what we were doing. I didn't think it would do any harm, considering we might soon be neighbors of a sort, so I said we were interested in buying the apartment. The lady asked if we would like to come in for a while. We looked at each other, then when the door was opened to us we went up the stairs. We were ushered into the living room where a large black grand piano took up most of the center space. Her name was Myrtle Winkelzug, and she was a very good host. She made us all tea, with her skinny, wrinkled, arthritic hands shaking a little as she delivered each cup. The piano was a gift from Harold not long before he disappeared. At this point Rob pulled out the book, and seeming to find what he was looking for, put it back in his bag. She and her husband Heinrich had been given a key and asked to take care of the house for a month but never returned. That key had only recently gone missing. She pointed with a frail pink, red and black patchy arm and crooked finger to a key hook on the wall. Then about a year ago she, and all the other neighbors in the street, received a letter in the mail from a local real estate agent asking if she wanted to buy the apartment at a reduced cost, but she declined. She showed us the letter, which was from the same agent Lucy had found. She told us she was an opera singer, before and after the war, and used to sing at the nearby State Opera Theatre. We didn't want to press her for too much information about the property, so we just had a general chat about Vienna, her husband, and the war. We managed to talk a little about the reclusive Harold and his wife, before it was time to leave. Apparently his wife fell ill and died of pneumonia, only a few years after they were married. He never got over her death, and always carried a silver locket, with her picture inside. One thing I wanted to know was if he had returned after the war, or not. She told me he did return for a short time but was like a different man, rarely coming out of his apartment. We thanked Myrtle for her hospitality, to which she said we were welcome anytime. We left and drove to the university. On the way Rob said the book mentioned the piano as being of significance, and a spare key he gave to someone unmentioned is referenced as a multi-lock or skeleton key. The old university administrator was very generous when Lucy said we were journalists researching a former lecturer regarding a posthumous award and gave us access to the general archives, with his presence of course. We had to use white gloves because some of the documents were old and fragile. Lucy set to work and quickly found a few pages of interest. Then Rob went through each file after her and noted a few more. While they were doing that, I chatted with our overseer. From his report, Harold, or Dr. Blomquist as the administrator preferred to call him, was well respected with high qualifications. He remembered he enjoyed spending time with the performing arts lecturer Miss Turtletaub at the opera. Lucy and Rob were finished, so with permission, the documents were photographed, without a flash of course, and we left the room, which was securely locked behind us. We bumped into an old dean on our way out of the hallowed halls. We were introduced and had a short conversation. A couple of things stuck in my mind about that man. First, he said that Harold was obviously a popular study. Then he said that before he disappeared he became obsessed with town planning, like he was looking for something lost in the sewers. Part of it made more sense when we were back in the car. Rob said someone had been in those files recently. Not only that, but the pages were muddled and some were missing. Then he rattled off the numbers. Only Rob would pick up the missing pages so quickly. Considering the amount of paperwork he went through, he had a natural ability to pick up patterns. Lucy brought up the file photographs on her computer. One was a building plan of the State Opera Theatre. While we wondered why that would be in there, Rob referenced the book again and said the grand piano was originally formed the old theatre. He had seen a plaque on one of the legs and recognized the unique operatic symbol above a serial number. Lucy asked Rob for the serial number, then surfed her favorite websites for it. She found a reference and said the piano was listed as stolen from the Baitlia Concert Hall in Slovakia during the war. It must have ended up in the opera theatre where Harold somehow got hold of it and had it delivered to Myrtle. At this point we decided to call it a day and retired to the hotel. The next morning I received a phone call from Grocer. He had arranged for our in-house real estate agency to put up 5 different buyers for the property. The agent for the property was keen to offload the house as soon as possible, so an auction was called for the following day at 11 am. Now we had a day to kill. I called Lucy and Rob to my room, where I told them about the auction, then we went over everything we had so far. After lunch in a nearby restaurant, we drove around the city for some sightseeing. We went to the bar after returning to the hotel, where Rob soon found a young single lady making eyes at him and asked her out for dinner. When they left I asked Lucy if she would enjoy a night at the opera, which she quickly accepted. We returned to our rooms and changed into some appropriate, fancy clothes and met back in the lobby, where she took my arm and we pretended to be high-class snobs, while we walked out to the taxi. It was a nice opera performance, but Lucy, not surprisingly, enjoyed it more than me. At the end we were surprised to see Myrtle, with an amazing old-fashioned dress and feathers in her headpiece. She was signing autographs, but when she saw us, she became very excited, breaking away from her fans, and offered to take us backstage. On our tour I jokingly asked if she knew any trapdoors or secret panels, to which she replied that just like most theaters there were plenty. She gave us a good tip for a different restaurant, where we ate before returning to the hotel. The phone rang in the hotel room in the morning, waking me out of a deep sleep. It was just a wake-up call. We got ready and went to meet Rob in the lobby, but he was nowhere to be seen. We were running out of time, so we asked the valet to bring our car. As we went to get in, I saw Rob running toward us, buttoning and tucking in his shirt on the way. He apologized for sleeping in, and we set off for the auction house. Sure enough, there were 5 bidders, plus ourselves and one other phone bidder, but then at the last moment, another lady joined the party. I hadn't expected that, but I had done my research and knew the going rate for a property like this. It should fetch about 15 million euros. Bidding started at 12 million and quickly went past 15. We had them on the ropes by 18.5. I hoped this house was worth it, but I still had a good feeling it was. I made a call to Grocer to tell him the news. He was also surprised about the extra bidder, who nearly outbid us, and said he would look into it. I sat down with the agent and signed the papers, then he handed me the keys. I thanked him, but as we left his office, the other male phone bidder approached me. He congratulated me on winning the property and asked on behalf of his client if I would like to meet for lunch, to perhaps discuss a lease agreement. I wasn't interested in renting out the house, but I didn't want him to know that. I wanted to find out who his client was and if he had any more information I could use, so I agreed. He offered me a lift in his company BMW, which I accepted, but first I turned to Lucy and slipped the house key onto the rental car keychain, so only she could see. I knew as I left that she would take Rob and check out the house. I wanted to accompany them, but this could be more important. Our door was opened for me when we arrived at a large modern gold glass building with Prochilot Industries on the top. This was obviously a large corporation because they were the only occupier of the building, and there were a lot of staff moving around, looking intensely busy. The driver showed me into an elevator and pushed the top button for floor 53. Elevator that made me feel an inch or two shorter before stretching again as we slowed at the top of our journey. The lift music was relaxing, and then the doors opened to an extraordinary panoramic view of Vienna, like a slice of heaven. I was ushered into a large office, with every expensive piece of office furniture and paintings you could imagine. There was a bar in the front corner to my right and a bathroom in the back corner to my left. I was introduced to Mr. Schaefer, a daunting tall solid man in his 50s, with grey hair in a military-style crew cut. The driver left the room as I was getting my fingers crushed from a very strong handshake. A file was open on his desk which he quickly shut, but not before I saw 3 old pages from the university file with matching page numbers. Schaefer was the owner of the company. He wanted to congratulate me on my acquisition, but before we talked business, he gave me a quick tour of the building on our way out to lunch. His company was mainly into mining anything of value that can be taken out of the ground from whatever land they could get their hands on. There was a large legal department, obviously dedicated to cutting through eco-red tape. The driver met us at the front revolving doors and ushered us into the back of a limo. We went to a very high-class restaurant, where we were presented with an incredible meal, including vintage wine. We had a lot of friendly small talk before getting down to business. He asked if I would consider a career in mining, but I told him I was happy with my current employment. He pushed the point of leasing the property from me, saying he would fully renovate, but unfortunately for him I could not be swayed. He expressed his disappointment at the end of the meal, then called for his driver. I politely said I would take a taxi, and offered to pay for my meal, but he insisted on paying. As my taxi departed, I turned and looked out the rear window to see Schaefer and his driver speaking intently. I watched as the driver got into a black BMW sedan and followed us at a distance, while Schaefer took a cab in the other direction. We all knew I was headed for the house, so it was no point trying to evade them. I tried calling Lucy, then Rob, but both calls went unanswered. I called Grocer and told him my predicament. He said he would call security and track my phone to get my coordinates. I was to give him the runaround for at least 10 minutes, so I asked the cab driver, who was all too happy to take the scenic route. Grocer came back on the phone and told me our legal team got to the bottom of the extra agent at the auction. His secretary had been arrested for corporate espionage and Prochilot Industries were implicated. Less than 5 minutes after he hung up, there was a huge crash behind us. I looked back to see a cement truck had T-boned the BMW at the previous intersection. I told the cab driver there was a big tip in it for him if he took me to the house as soon as possible, to which he put his foot to the floor, and I quickly decided to fasten my seatbelt. As we arrived, I threw the driver a wad of euros and hit the ground running, knowing it wouldn't be long before we had some undesirable company. I made my way through the jungle path that Rob and Lucy must have made with a machete. The front door was open, so I slowed down and cautiously entered. Thin beams of light shone in the windows, slicing through the dust that clouded the musty room. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I noticed one of the beams was a torch on the floor. I grabbed it and searched every room. Everything had been displaced, I could tell by the dust marks. Even the pictures on the walls had been moved. I called out, but there was no answer from either of my colleagues. The wooden cellar door was locked, so I kicked it open, still mindful of the time frame, and went down the stairs. There was plenty of wine in the racks and a large steel door, which by the marks on the floor had recently been opened. It was held shut from my side with a steel bar, which I removed, and a key that I turned to hear it unlatch and echo out the other side. I opened the heavy door and entered, finding myself in a rough stone tunnel. As I moved forward I had to crouch because it was not high enough to walk upright. Then I heard their voices. Lucy and Rob were stumbling toward me, but I could see only one torch light. I couldn't make out what they were saying, until it was too late. The door shut behind me, and we heard the steel bar get jammed into place, and the key latch crack shut, which echoed through the tunnel and back again. Like dropping a stone down a well, to see how deep it is, the echo told me this was a long tunnel. They were dusty and disheveled and very thirsty, but I had nothing to give them. Rob told me his bag with the book had been taken, along with Lucy's laptop, which fortunately was heavily security protected. There wasn't time to waste, we had to find a way out. I presumed there was not a lot of oxygen, although it was a long tunnel. They were trying to find the end when they heard me come in, and turned back to warn me. I led the way this time. Not long after passing the point they reached last time, we found some half-filled spring water bottles. They drank up. My stomach was full from lunch, but I didn't bring that up. We kept some of the water for later. We continued until we came to a T-junction. To the right the tunnel had obviously collapsed, so we turned left. The whole way Rob was counting, I wasn't sure why. Soon we could see the end of the tunnel in the distance, surrounded by pickaxes and shovels. We grabbed a pickaxe each and tried to break some of the stone wall, but made very little impact. Rob threw his axe in frustration, and it hit the side of the tunnel, knocking some dirt away to reveal timber. We grabbed the axes and hit the wall until the dirt fell away, revealing an old boarded-up panel, the same height as the tunnel. We looked at each other for a moment, then slammed into it, tearing it down to reveal some sort of mining machine. I bet the people with the pickaxes would like to have known this was here, and it had been here for some time, anywhere up to 70 years. Rob checked the fuel tank and said it was about half full. There was obviously no working battery, but fortunately for us, we found a crank handle. After half an hour of cranking, we had almost given up, when the machine coughed and spluttered to life. Rob had been counting because he had a mental map of the surface and estimated we were near a major branch of the Austria Bank. We learned the controls and maneuvered the machine into position. It cut through the rock like butter, till we hit a steel wall. Using the pickaxes we knocked the stone away from a full panel, and pried it off. Fresh air rushed in and we could see a void filled with the settling dust we had just created and fine red beams of light crisscrossing what became clearer as a vault. This wasn't what we came for. We didn't want to raid a bank, we wanted something salvageable. Besides all of that, we needed to escape, and scrambling into a high-security bank vault with possible ear-piercing alarms was not on my agenda. We sat down to think and I shone the torch around. Something glinted on the ceiling of the tunnel, which was a little higher here, allowing me to stand. I went closer to look and realized it was a camera. I ducked back out of its vision, as I did the red beams cut out in the vault. At first I thought it was someone trying to help us, but we all agreed it must be a trap. I had an idea. I got into the mining machine and pushed all the tailings into the cavern where we took the machine from, giving us room to retreat. We were then able to drive back down the tunnel to the other end, where we saw the cave-in. As the machine chewed through the rubble, we had learned to put our shirts over our nose and mouth so we could breathe through the dust. The tunnel opened into another section, but again it had a dead end. Rob said from his calculations we were now near or under the State Opera Theatre. We drank the last of our water, then Lucy went to explore an alcove off to the right. We heard a blood-curdling scream. We jumped out and ran to find Lucy. She was staring at, and shining her shaking torch on, a mummified body sitting on the ground against the wall. From the tattered clothing and grey hair, we could tell it was an older man. His knees were up with hands slumped in his lap, holding a silver locket with a black and white photo of a beautiful young lady. So this was where Harold got to. He must have been mining down here when the tunnel caved in. It must have sealed air tight and caused his body to be so well preserved. His old pickaxe and shovel were up against the rounded end of the tunnel, so we moved them and ran the drilling machine straight into that area of the wall. Within 5 minutes we hit steel again. This was obviously how they made basements back in the day. I didn't think we had time to dig around the steel panel, so we loaded Harold into the machine and pushed through the rubble heading back to the vault. As the metal sleigh rumbled at speed down the tunnel, I sat across from Harold and shone the torch on his face. The bumping made his bottom jaw come loose and bounce, which made him look even creepier, like he was laughing all the way to the bank. We stopped just short of the camera and turned off the engine to listen. It was deadly quiet, no noise came from the iron door we entered through, or the bank. Then Lucy carefully drove us into the vault, and just as the camera was almost out of sight, I threw a rock and smashed it. She quickly reversed out and I ran to the broken camera, tore it off and separated the wires, then connected them to one of the security points inside the vault, which managed to get 2 red beams working. I only needed one to set the trap. I went back aboard and this time covered Harold with some black plastic, but as Lucy drove at breakneck speed through the tunnel, it started to fall off him, covering half his face. He now looked like he was wearing a mask and cape like some ghostly phantom. When we approached the rubble at the end, I asked Lucy for the controls and rammed the nose down at the last moment, causing the tailings to fill the tunnel behind us. When the dust settled, we found ourselves in a hole I dug below the original floor level of the tunnel. The machine spluttered to a stop and we knew we were out of fuel. In the silence through the gap at the top of the rubble, we heard the steel door unlatch, then we could hear voices as men rushed in. At the tail end I could hear Schaefer barking orders. They seemed to have fallen for us going into the bank and were preparing to trap us there. As the first man entered the vault, we all put our hands over our ears as a head-piercing alarm sounded. It immediately gave me a headache and blurred my vision, and while it was sounding I could swear I saw Harold with his fingers in his ears. We didn't have to put up with the noise for long because the vibrations caused the entire tunnel to collapse. We ducked down in the machine as the steel wall fell on top, missing us by inches. Again we felt a rush of fresh air come from the other side and managed to struggle out of a gap at the back of the machine and onto the huge steel plate which had shielded us from a lot of rubble. We clambered over that rubble and headed for the opening, leaving Harold entombed once again. We shook the dirt out of our hair and brushed it off our clothes. We looked like chimney sweeps. I had to bang my battered torch to make it work, then shone it on Rob and Lucy to see their mouths open in awe as they looked around. I looked at what they could see, a huge room full of stolen paintings, statues, artworks and priceless treasures. It must have been stored here during the war. Lucy had done some research on the theater and said it was bombed toward the end of the war and half destroyed. The builders had pushed the rubble into the basement to create a foundation to rebuild on, so this shouldn't be here. That's if we were under the theater, but we still had not escaped and it must have been well into the evening outside. There was a long stairway running diagonally up the left-hand wall, so we made our way over there. It was very rusty, and halfway up, one step gave way under Lucy's foot. A scream echoed around the huge room, followed by the echo of the clang of the step hitting the concrete floor. We pressed on and came to the ceiling. There was wire mesh holding back loose bricks above, which we hoped was a possible exit point. We went down and looked around till Rob found an old toolbox with wire cutters. We stood well back as he broke through. I was hoping all the surprises were past, but as the wire fell away, a pile of rubble and bones showered down on us, scattering and bouncing down the stairs and onto the concrete floor below. It caused a cacophony of noise mingled with our screams. The bones owner must have been wearing a coat which caught on the stairs. We composed ourselves. Rob picked it up for a closer look. It was a soldier's uniform with the embossed name Sergeant Heinrich Winkelzeuger, Myrtle's husband. He obviously did not die in the war, but was possibly working with Harold, trying to gain access to the treasure trove from both ends, or perhaps trying to rescue him. We looked up the hole and saw a crack of light at the top. Lucy, who was keen to get out, went first and we followed up through a maze of rubble, carefully choosing our footholds. Heinrich must have removed one brick at a time, and he nearly made it through before he slipped and fell to a painful death. We soon came to a wooden panel which Lucy lifted slowly. She said it appeared to be an empty theatrical changing room, so we all clambered out of the hole and into the room, glad to be free of our tomb. We found water and biscuits and stopped to recover for a short time. It was obviously a theater night, because we could hear hordes of people milling around. We put the flooring back as we found it so as not to give away its position, then donned an outfit each from the many costumes on racks around the room. We helped each other with makeup over our dusty faces and counted to 3 before opening the door and strutting out. No one was surprised to see 3 cats walking around. There was all sorts of characters about. We left the building and caught a cab to the hotel. By the time the police arrived to ask us about a break-in at a bank and our newly acquired apartment, we were showered, refreshed, and in our finest clothes, eating a meal in the restaurant. I told them I didn't have the slightest idea what they were talking about. They said a couple of goons had survived in a vault after a cave-in, and were talking about 2 men and a lady trying to rob the bank. I asked if the bank was robbed, to which they said no, and they caught someone in the act, so why would they need to speak to us? As for the house break-in, some tradesmen were just starting a renovation. I thanked them for their concern, and said I would go straight to my apartment after dinner to lock up. They seemed satisfied with that, and we never heard from them again. Grocer was very happy to hear about our discovery. He knew what to do with the find, and how to make good money out of it, even though half the loot had to be returned to its rightful owners. He gave us a very generous commission, and asked if we would like to team up again to run a little mining company in Vienna, which had just come on the market. He would like to consolidate it into his salvage empire. It was an offer too good to refuse.
Frugal finds with thrifty minds, treasures of the rarest kinds, notes that dance in written trance. We author our own stories, chance. Chocolate smudges, pages turn, lessons lived are lessons learned. Cozy nooks and music hooks, life's a book of loving looks. Strum chords of hearts so fond, melodies from the beyond. Chocolate dreams and coffee steam, we're weaving life's warm tapestry. In the heart of home we spins, happiness in simple things. This country tune under the moon, we croon along with life's sweet boon. In the heart of home we spins, happiness in simple things. This country tune